Let me go to Grace. Hello, Grace. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Very good. Where do you go to school? I shouldn't even ask that. You're in Texas, and you have a professor. And tell me about the professor without singling him out or her.
Sure. So my professor, we're learning about different communication theories. And what we have been talking about for the last few weeks is critical theory, especially in the economic sense. Basically saying that there is a huge gap between the bottom 10% and the top 1%. And the people in the bottom 10% are stuck there, and the people at the top are resilient and stay at the top and basically have a hand over everyone. And the people at the bottom, especially the communities of color, do not really, they have a chance, but it's a very limited chance of getting even in the top 10%.
Right.
So,
okay. All right. So you have to argue this. It's a flawed thing to, if you're going to argue that this system, as it currently stands, is a free market, because it's not a free market. It is big businesses and those with real money colluding with Congress and everybody else, not through just elections, but through lobbying. That really, I mean, that's why you see Google and Twitter getting all of the special exemptions, because they've got enough money to be able to do it. So don't argue that this system that we're using right now, this system needs to be cleaned up, and people need to go to jail, and laws need to be enacted to stop this kind of stuff. Grace, let me introduce you to Justin Haskins. Have you two met? Have you already talked on the phone?
We actually talked yesterday on the phone,
okay.
Yes.
All right. So Justin, welcome, Justin. Justin is, I think, one of the best voices on socialism, Marxism, what's going on in America, and also critical theory. And I get a little fuzzy and probably too much in the weeds on critical theory. So I wanted to get Justin, who I think is really good. Hi, Justin.
Hey, how you doing, Glenn? Good to speak with you.
Good to talk to you. So, Justin, you understand what Grace is trying to find out, right?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Grace and I spoke yesterday, and she's got an assignment coming up, and if we don't get an A on this assignment, I'm going to have a Black Lives Matter-like protest on the front lawn of the college. I think that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
That's going to be the plan.
So, Justin,
I do understand it.
Take her through, and the audience, because there's a lot of people. I just talked to Gad Sad yesterday, and by the way, if you're a Blaze TV subscriber, that is out right now. You can watch it on demand. Tomorrow it'll be released on YouTube for everybody else at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But Grace, I urge you to watch that, because he's also, he's a professor, and he explains what's going on really, really well. I think that will help you as well. If you have somebody in your life that is trying to figure things out, watch that podcast with him, because he's really good. All right, so Justin, where do we start?
Okay, so I think the most important thing to understand is what critical theorists are trying to do. And what critical theorists are trying to do is they're looking at the world, the way of looking at the world. That's what critical theory is. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to explain why the problems that exist in the world exist the way that they do. And essentially what critical theorists argue, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of critical theories, but what they always try to argue is that the reason why some groups of people in society, whether it's race or religion or any other kind of group, class, the reason why those people are not successful relative to other people, not as successful as other people, is because of power structures, differences between power in society. So, for example, critical race theory is one of the easiest ones to understand. White people wrote the laws of the United States. This is how a critical race theorist would talk. White people wrote the laws of the United States. So the system is rigged in the favor of white people, even if they didn't do it deliberately. They subconsciously did it. They created a system that benefits their own group. And so African Americans and Hispanics and other groups, they have no hope of success because the rules are written to favor the people who are in power. And that's what makes it so hard for people to move out of lower classes into upper classes. This is what they would argue. And so all the problems that exist in society exist directly or indirectly because of a difference in power dynamics between groups. So the only way to fix that is for there to be no differences in powers between groups. Now, this is why it's so important for people. It's really important for people to understand this. This is a fundamentally Marxist concept. And the reason I say that is not only because Karl Marx made these exact same kinds of arguments about wealth when he's arguing against capitalism,
right,
but because when you take this to its logical end, if you have different amounts of wealth in society, even if you could fix all the other differences in power, if you have different amounts of wealth in society, then you have different amounts of power in society. So the only way to fix the problem, if you take it to its logical end, is for everyone to have exactly the same amount of wealth. That's communism. That's why this system ultimately always leads back to Marxism, because that's the only way for there to have no differences in power that in society.
The other way to go is like a national socialism or some sort of authoritarianism. It doesn't have to be communism, but it's always Marxism. The Nazis were socialists, national socialists. And what they said was you can have private property, but you can only use it the way the state wants you to use it. What the Great Reset, now being pushed by the UN and also the Economic Forum, World Economic Forum, that Great Reset is based on this same thing, that we're going to balance everything out, and companies will be able to own things, and they'll be the manufacturing company. Apple will still exist, but they'll be partners with the government. They'll have to make the things that the government and their advisors say they need to make. And it's more of a Chinese communism where it's a hybrid between the two, they say, but there is no free market in that. Would you agree, Justin?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is the way that you get socialism in the 21st century. You're not going to get it through marching people out of the cities into communes in the countryside like they did 50, 60 years ago. It's just not going to happen. You're going to do it exactly the way you just described, by controlling the economy, not necessarily owning everything. And the elites, of course, are the only people in the world who are qualified enough to tell everyone in the world how to live. It has to be the elites that control all of us. So you're exactly right, and that's what the Great Reset is all about, and that's what the World Economic Forum is pushing for.
So, Grace, before we move on, any questions on what Justin just said?
So far, it is making sense. He's very clear. So.
Okay. So where do we go now?
Right. So I think we need to start explaining how you can dismiss this argument. It's a very, very popular argument. Essentially, as Grace pointed out, one of the go-to arguments that they make on the left is there's this wealth gap. And this wealth gap is proof of the fact that there's this oppression that's going on, that the system is rigged, that it's completely unfair, and they focus on that wealth gap all the time, right? So the most important, there's two ways to debunk socialism in general, I think, all kinds of socialist systems. The first is an economic argument, all right? And what you want to do is you want to look at the history of the world. Just look at the history of the world. Find any successful socialist society that has ever existed.
And by the way, they
never happened.
Yeah, they existed in America. Really good, smart socialists have tried it in America. In fact, look here in Dallas. That's what Reunion Square is about. That was a town of socialists. In fact, one of the leaders of France of the Socialist Party came over here to do it, and it failed spectacularly. So even the best minds have tried it, and with the best intent, and it fails always.
Right, exactly, and not just in America, not just in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, literally every continent on the planet where there's human beings, they've tried some kind of socialist system, and it has failed spectacularly. And in most cases, those countries don't exist anymore. Those governments have been completely abandoned. So the history of it, just right off the bat, should be a gigantic red flag. If you can't find one successful example of your idea that's been around for 150 years, then maybe your idea is not a very good one. I think that's a good way to start.
And hold on just a second. And I want you to know the Pilgrims tried a form of it. The Mormons tried a form of it after they had crossed the mountain. They were so broke and just broken. They tried, I think it was called the United Order or something. They tried something where it basically socialism before Marx. So even the best intended people, even the people who are loyal to God, this is not about Marx. This is about human nature. It doesn't work. Go ahead, Justin.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and in arguing with socialists, the quotes from the Pilgrims, from the Puritans, talking about how this system doesn't work are absolutely unbelievable. If they have arguing with socialists, look that up. If you don't have it, buy it and check those quotes out because they're unbelievable. But the second thing that I think needs to be addressed is this wealth inequality argument. The fact of the matter is, and this is going to sound a little controversial to some people, but I don't give a crap about wealth inequality. It doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is because if you look at history, the societies that have had the best wealth equality are the ones that are hellholes. Those are the places where everybody's miserable. That's what you get in North Korea. Everyone is essentially equal except for the ruling people, of course, but everyone else is essentially equal. That's what we see in Cambodia with the killing fields and the Khmer Rouge. That was what they were going for there. When you have absolute wealth equality, you end up with lots of poverty.
And that's why the great example of this is that's why the Venezuelan people hired a bus driver. A guy who had never been rich, was not powerful. He's going to be the ruler of the people. But once these people get in charge, people with power go corrupt almost always. And when they have no stops, that's why that bus driver is now one of the richer people in the world.
That's exactly right. Now, conversely, the societies that have wealth inequality and have free markets or relatively free markets and protections for individual liberty, because you have to have both of those things. You can't just have free markets without protections for individual liberty. But when you have both, what we see is even though you have big wealth gaps, the quality of life for everyone has dramatically improved in these societies over the past 200 to 300 years. And there are essentially no exceptions to this. This is the norm. This is the rule. If you have a free market society and you have protections for individual liberty, the quality of life for even the poorest people in society will be dramatically improved.